Ford of Europe could do no wrong in the 1960s and 70s, and the Escort quite possibly turned out to be their crowning achievement. While many think of the Mini as the car that got Britain moving, the Mini only sold 5 million cars worldwide over its entire life. The Escort sold almost 5 times that amount in a shorter period of time. So just how popular was it in the grander scheme of things? Well, let's look at the top 10 selling Ford vehicles of all time. At number 10 with 5 million sold is the LTD, a staple saloon for Americans in the 1970s. At 9 is the American family saloon of the 80s and 90s, the Taurus, with 8 million sold. At number 8 is the Explorer with 8.2 million and counting, arguably the new large family car for the 21st century. Number 7 isn't even a car, the Ford Transit, the van that transports the world's stuff around, with almost 9 million sold. And if you want to see a video on it, click on the link above. Just ahead on sales and a completely different vehicle is Ford's 1960s American muscle car that's gone through so many different versions, the Mustang, with 9.3 million sold. But now we see just how influential European and world cars have been. At number 5, the Ford Focus at 13.6 million. Number 4, yes, only number 4, is a car that some may have thought would have topped the charts, the Model T Ford at 16.5 million cars. And for the time, that was a phenomenal figure. But just recently passing it on sales as a car about the same size but thoroughly modern, the Fiesta with 16.6 million as of the end of 2019. Number 2 is the subject of this video, the Escort, with 24 million cars sold, and it shows that even though the Focus has been around for 22 years, it still has some way to go until it passes its predecessor. But at number 1 and way out in the lead is the vehicle that gets America moving, the Ford F-Series truck at 41 million. But we're not here to talk about trucks. This is the phenomenal Ford Escort story. The Ford Anglia had been a big success for Ford. Initially released just 2 months into the Second World War, it had been a basic but popular car that had sold over 1.5 million cars by the 1960s. With more and more people buying their first car and getting on the road, it was more important than ever that Ford's entry-level car should be a success. Reducing costs were key to selling a car more competitively, and Ford was keen to stop designing essentially the same car for different European markets. The first joint development between Ford of Germany and Ford of Britain was the Transit in 1965. It was decided the Anglia update would be the second European vehicle, although it would be developed exclusively by Ford of Britain. The new car was initially intended to be a Ford Anglia update, but as Ford started seeing this more and more as a pan-European model, they renamed it to the Escort, a name that they felt would work better. Like so many names Ford used, this one was recycled from the Escort 100e, an estate version of the Anglia in the late 1950s. The new car would get upgrades that were becoming standard on larger cars at the time. All gears would get Synchromesh, and if you have ever driven a car without Synchromesh, you'll know just how helpful that is. It would get rack and pinion steering for the first time that gave more confidence behind the wheel and reduced the turning circle to boot. Ford would add its Aeroflow system from the Cortina to keep the interior fresh for longer drives. The Anglia had taken styling cues from 1950s American cars, and the new car would do the same from newer 1960s models. It would get its trademark dog bone grille and a Coke bottle rear profile that was becoming fashionable. A similar shape would be used by the Cortina and the Capri just a couple of years later on. During the design, Ford were careful to keep the retail price in line with that of the outgoing Ford Anglia to ensure that it would retain all of those happy customers. And they were largely successful, with only a small price increase over the old car. The basic first generation Escort wasn't fast. It got to 60 in 22 seconds, but fast wasn't what customers were looking for. They wanted a car that would start in the morning and get them to where they wanted to go for a reasonable price, and the Escort delivered in spades. And it was a full 7 seconds faster to 60 than the outgoing basic Anglia, thanks to the new cross-flow variant of the 1.1 litre Kent engine. It was the perfect companion to Ford's other 1960s car that was taking the world by storm, the Ford Cortina, and for years both cars would duke it out at the top of the UK charts for the most popular car. It took time to gain traction on the continent, where German customers preferred their Opels, French their Renaults, and Italians their Fiats. Although the Escort had a similar suspension layout to the last Ford Anglia, Ford had tuned it so it handled much better through the corners. Reviewers at the time called it a night and day difference. So when Ford decided to put a sporty engine in the car and go racing, it started winning almost right away. Ford put cash behind motor racing so it could be seen on Saturday afternoon telly beating the competition. Trim levels in the late 1960s were, let's say, Spartan compared to what drivers expect today. The deluxe model, one up from the base model, had the luxury of rubber flooring. One up from that, the supermodel got carpet and a cigar lighter. But what you were buying for your £695 in 1968 was a well-mannered, easy-to-drive, reliable car, and that counted for a lot. The car would be offered in 1.1, 1.3 and 1.6 litre versions with both manual and automatic gearboxes, although none could be described as quick at its launch in 1968 except for the 1.3 litre twin cam that boasted a sub 10 second 0 to 60 time. And it was available in both the saloon and the estate version, giving a degree of practicality to Ford's small entry-level car. Ford had been working with Lotus to make competition versions of the Cortina, but from 1967 they switched to the Escort as their main motorsport model. It had great handling, but was lighter than the Cortina while still allowing a 1.6 litre twin-cam engine that Lotus originally fitted to its Elan. But soon Ford switched over to start a long and illustrious relationship with Cosworth with their souped-up 16-valve version of the 1.6 litre Kent engine. The car would become known as the RS 1600, and it would go on to win many championships. One of its most famous victories came in the London to Mexico rally in 1970. This gave rise to an Escort Mexico Special Edition to celebrate the victory. In 1969, the saloon gained 4 doors to join the 2-door saloon and estate. France and Italy got a tiny 940cc engine to help with tax restrictions, but this made for a very slow car. A year later, in 1970, Ford started selling the Escort in Australia as the saloon and van, but unfortunately not the estate version. And the car started to be produced around the world as well. Initially in the UK and Belgium, production then moved to Germany and started up in Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, Israel and even Taiwan. Never one to miss a trick, Ford introduced the Escort Sport in 1971. The RS 1600, although the fastest car of the bunch, also cost a bunch of 1,500 new British pounds. The Sport looked like an RS 1600 or Mexico and still used the still fast 1300 GT engine, but with a cheaper interior it cost just £940. In 1973, a road-going version of the temperamental 2-litre Rally Escort was launched as the RS 2000. And although it was slower to 60 than the RS 1600, it was more well-mannered through the bends and the suspension was kinder to your back on the way to work in the morning. By 1974, Ford proudly announced it had produced 2 million Escorts, the first Ford model to do so outside the US. This was just the marketing Ford wanted to get customers excited for the second generation of Escort that started rolling off production lines in December and went on sale the following month. While the first generation was developed by Ford of Britain, the second generation would be a joint European development, as were pretty much all Ford vehicles at this stage. But it would be given the decidedly British code name of Brenda. As could be seen from the exterior, it was little more than a reskin of the old car, with simpler straight lines similar to what they'd done with the Ford Capri. It did have a new underbody, but that had been introduced on the first generation model 6 months earlier. And like other Fords of the era, the estate and van versions retained the rear end from previous generation cars. The model naming would change, starting with the base popular trim level, then L, then GL. The top of the range would be the luxurious Ghia, just a year after Ford started using the premium brand name on the Ford Granada. And the Escort Ghia was something special, receiving air conditioning as standard. The Sport, RS Mexico and RS 2000 spec models would remain as Ford continued its rallying dominance, continually tweaking the engine and chassis to keep it ahead of the competition. It won the RAC Rally every year from 1975 to 1979, along with the 1979 World Rally Championship using a special 1.8 litre engine. And those rallying Escorts would bring the squarer front-end treatment to the forecourt, and this foreshadowed the boxy style the next generation would bring. The Estate still wasn't available in Australia, so the panel van was available in higher interior trim levels to try to make up for it. The 1.1 litre engine was dropped, and eventually the 1.3 litre as well to comply with emissions regulations, being replaced with the 2 litre Pinto engine. But the Escort wasn't popular in Australia, with homegrown cars being more appealing to Aussie sentiments and cheaper Japanese small cars being more appealing to Aussie wallets. Production in Israel was joined by partial assembly in South Africa, and like Australia, the small 1.1 litre engine was left on the sidelines. But unlike Australia, it was popular, with the 1600 Sport being the most popular car in South Africa in 1980. Production in Australia, New Zealand and South Africa ended in 1980, being replaced by the Mazda 323 based Ford Laser. And hold on to that thought because we'll come back to it later. The Escort continued trading paint at the top of the UK charts with its larger sister, the Cortina. To keep it selling, Ford kept making small updates like a black front grille, updated steering wheel and the usual trick of including more options as standard, like carpet interior for the Popular and the heated rear windscreen for the L model. Special Linnet, Goldcrest and Harrier special editions were introduced in 1979, so the cars kept moving off the dealer's forecourt. It's at this point the Escort story diverges for a bit. Well, it shouldn't, but as you'll see, it does. Ford and every other car manufacturer wanted fuel-efficient cars ever since the price of petrol went through the roof in 1973. They'd introduced the Ford Fiesta in both Europe and North America in the late 1970s. But with Detroit's answer to the Escort, the Ford Pinto being such a disaster, Ford decided the next generation Escort would be a true world car that would further reduce development costs. When I say world car, I'm obviously missing out large swathes of the world who decided to go the Ford Laser route based on the Mazda 323. Again, hold that thought, we're going to get back to it. With small cars moving to the more efficient front-wheel drive layout, the third generation would follow suit, saving valuable weight and space. And it would be the first front-wheel drive Ford in North America. The car was a completely new design, with a hatchback for the first time, so it could take on the might of Volkswagen's Golf and Japanese small car imports that were eating into Ford's sales on both sides of the Atlantic. But although each had a 94.2-inch wheelbase, a notched aeroback shape, a 1.4 litre CVH engine and the name Escort, despite the fact that Ford of Europe wanted to call it Erica, but let's not go into that, these cars had almost nothing to do with each other. It's like saying Birmingham, England and Birmingham, Alabama are the same. Yes, they're both called Birmingham, and yes, they're both cities with people who probably drove around in Escorts, but there's a lot of other differences. Although, as a proud Brummie, I'm allowed to make this joke, you can't understand what the heck they're saying in either place. So first out of the gate was Ford of Europe in 1980 with a third generation Escort. It was boxier, as was the fashion of the time, but despite that boxiness, the drag factor had dropped from 0.45 to 0.39, thanks in part to that aeroback bustle. And with new engines, the car was both faster and more fuel efficient. It all added up to a winning combination that won European Car of the Year in 1981, beating stiff competition from the Fiat Panda and the Austin Metro. Its popularity catapulted the Escort to the top of the UK sales charts where, spoiler alert, it was to remain the #1 selling car until the Escort hit the rocks in 1990. The usual lineup of engines from 1.1 litres to 1.6 litres were available. Unlike previous generations, an automatic wasn't available until Ford grabbed one from the US model in 1983. And the old-fashioned rear leaf spring suspension was gone to be replaced with a fully independent setup. Despite this, the suspension came in for criticism by the motoring press for a harsh and unforgiving ride. Ford worked on an RS 1700 turbo version for rallying to continue their domination, but couldn't get the car competitive. With the four-wheel drive Audi Quattro sweeping titles, Ford started from scratch, making the mid-engined RS200 in 1984. It was powered by a 1.8 litre Cosworth engine that developed 250 horsepower in the road-going version and up to 450 horsepower while racing. This left Ford without an RS version for their road-going car. With the Golf GTI becoming a popular hot hatch, Ford initially answered it with a 95 horsepower XR3 with a 0 to 60 time just over 9 seconds. It was uprated to the fuel-injected XR3i in 1982, and with that it got a small boost in performance. In the hot hatch 1980s, the XR3i and the smaller Fiesta XR2 were some of the most desirable cars to get. Ford did make an RS version in limited numbers, the RS 1600i in 1982, and added a turbo in 1984, but it came in for criticism, and with the launch lost in between publicity for the new Granada and the RS 200, it was the XR3i that got the most interest. This is also when my association with the Escort started, with my mum's 1984 quartz gold 1.3 litre Escort, which actually looks silver. It got spectacularly written off in a high-speed crash involving all 3 lanes of the M6 near Stoke in 1987. Thankfully, me, my mum and my sister were unharmed, and a couple of years later I even happened to see this supposedly totaled car back on the road as I was driving around town. According to the DVLA, it was still being driven in 1996. 1983 brought a slew of changes. As well as the automatic gearbox, an economical diesel engine arrived, giving excellent fuel economy. But that phenomenal fuel economy meant anemic acceleration. And a saloon version would arrive as the Ford Orion. With the booted Ford Cortina being replaced by the hatchback Ford Sierra, this would give customers who love saloons something to buy. Production would start up in Argentina and Brazil, with some Brazilian versions running on alcohol to comply with local laws. They also launched a budget Escort Hobby with a tiny 1 litre 50 horsepower engine. Ford had been customising the Escort platform ever since its release in 1968, turning it into a small van. By 1983, the Escort was so common on the roads that Ford was selling high-end open-top cabriolet versions to wannabe yuppies, perfect for those cold winter ski trips. It's amazing how Ford could sell essentially the same car to so many different types of people. The third generation of Escort had sold phenomenally well, especially in the UK where 1.5 million of them were on the roads. So the fourth generation in 1986 was just a tweak on that winning formula. Like the second generation, it was little more than a reskin of the third generation car, although as Ford kept improving the car year on year, it was of course an improved car from the 1980 version. The internal Ford codename was Erica 86, playing on the Erica codename they'd given the third generation car. The styling took cues from the recently released Granada and included ABS for the first time, along with an updated dashboard and air conditioning for South American models. The Orion got a similar makeover. In general, the car was tweaked all round to keep it competitive, and competition was hotting up, with Vauxhall recently introducing the Astra, Volkswagen updating the Golf, and Peugeot producing the 309 with a similar Escort rear bustle. By now the Escort was being produced in vast quantities around Europe and South America, and the hot hatch and yuppie cabriolet version collided with the XR3i Cabriolet. But with the top shorn off, the body didn't have the rigidity to handle tight twisting roads. And on the other end of the spectrum, it got a larger improved 1.8 litre diesel engine. Everything was coming up roses for the Escort by the late 1980s as they prepared for the fifth generation, but it was all going to go very, very wrong. But before we get there, how did the North American Escort fare? It debuted just a month after the European model in 1980, along with a Mercury Lynx version. It was a car for the sophisticated woman around town, or for the sophisticated man around town who's just driven into the wilderness. Like the European version, it was both a hatchback and a station wagon. As was befitting American Fords at the time, it used a lot of chrome and occasionally wood, along with a migraine-inducing interior. The 1.6 litre engine it shared with the European model would be the smallest engine, but Ford would add a 1.9 litre engine and there would be the choice of a manual or an automatic. It would be joined by a 2 litre Mazda diesel in 1984. Like the European version, it was an instant success. If you believe Ford marketing, it was the #1 selling car between 1982 and 1988. But that's likely stretching the facts a little. But from the data I found, it was indeed one of the top selling passenger cars during the 1980s. While Europe got the sporty XR3, North America got the GT model. But with a 0 to 60 time of 11.2 seconds, it wasn't going to set the world on fire. But the GT Turbo, introduced in 1984, did manage to get that down to 9 seconds. The Escort also gained a second model from the same platform, the EXP or the Mercury LN7, a two-door lukewarm sports coupe. In 1985, the North American Escort got a facelift, and another in 1988, and the 1.6 litre engine was dropped. But sales were starting to decline as customers moved to larger family sedans. Ford needed a new model and looked to its partner Mazda. The first fruits of this relationship was the 1987 Mercury Tracer, replacing the Escort-based Mercury Lynx. Both the Escort and the Tracer were replaced in 1991 by a car based on the Mazda B platform, just like the Mazda-derived Ford Laser that had been sold in the 1980s in other parts of the world. And Ford Lasers in those regions would essentially be the same car as the North American Ford Escort and Mercury Tracer. So you could call the 1990s Ford Escort and Laser a world car if you don't include Europe. The new version was styled to look like a small Ford Taurus that was popular at the time. It got a restyle in 1997, and Ford took another crack at making a sporty two-door coupe with a 2-litre 130 horsepower Escort ZX2 model with a much improved 0 to 60 time of 7.4 seconds. But none of these updates brought back the sales success of the 1980s as customers moved back towards SUVs, trucks and minivans, and the North American Escort bowed out in 2003. But let's get back to the European Ford Escort. When we left it, Ford was riding high in the late 1980s with seemingly every man and his dog buying one. With this, Ford did a major update for the 5th generation in 1990. The suspension was simplified from being fully independent to using torsion bars. The existing engines were carried over from the old car, as the new Zetec engines wouldn't be ready for another couple of years. The car would get more options as standard than ever before, even on the base models. But all those changes and extras made for a heavier car, around 100 kilograms heavier. Imagine two identical Escorts in a drag race. Now throw 100 bags of sugar into the back of one of them. Which one's going to win? This was a major disadvantage to the car, and it showed not just in straight line performance, but in handling with the inferior torsion bar suspension. Motor critics gave it scathing reviews, and they weren't fans of the bland styling update either. The Escort's run as the most popular car came to an abrupt halt the year the 5th generation was released. The new #1 was the Fiesta, and Ford would take notice, working hard behind the scenes to make it right. Okay, I've brought in a special guest, Mrs. Big Car, to settle an argument that's been going on for over 20 years. Say hi, Mrs. Big Car.
Hi, Mrs. Big Car.
When we met, I had a rather amazing 1989 red 4th generation Escort. Mrs. Big Car, on the other hand, had a rather awful 1991 black 5th generation Escort. So we're both going to give you a short pitch on why our car was the best, and you get to decide who's right. First of all, my 1989 4th generation was the culmination of the 1980 front-wheel drive model that sold by the bucket load because it was so good. It had the 1.3 litre HCS engine from the Fiesta, the latest version of the long-running Kent engine. It never gave me a day of trouble. While we were going out, I had the chance to drive both cars back to back, and boy did the 5th generation wallow on a twisty A road, and it felt so much slower. Plus black? Really? Have you ever tried to keep a black car clean? I put it to you that the 1989 Escort beats the pants off any Escort from 1991. Okay, over to you, Mrs. Big Car.
Well, I completely disagree because I drove my cute, adorable, black with a nice little bottom 1991 Escort, and it was the best car that I have ever owned. It was the first car that I ever owned. And my argument is quite simply, my car had everything that his car had, only it jazzed. Jazzed.
Really?
And in addition, boom, that's for the comment about black. Boom. That's for the comments that you had about my car.
Are we going to have a cotton ball fight?
No, I'm just going to make you fun first.
So that's your argument?
No, yeah, because my car had everything that your car had, right? But in addition, it had a much better contoured body, and so it really drove with comfort and security and really anything that a person of discerning taste, comme moi, would really appreciate.
Okay, she's gone now. But anyway, the 4th generation obviously way better than the 5th generation, and really, cotton balls throwing these at me? What a baby. By 1992, Ford had made amends somewhat. The suspension and steering were improved, and those new Zetec engines finally arrived, making fuel injection standard on all petrol engines. The 1992 base Escort had gained another 90 bags of sugar in weight, so the more powerful engines were really needed to move that extra weight around. Ford's hard work did the trick, and the Escort returned to the top of the UK sales charts. But the best Ford Escort released in 1992 wasn't even an Escort. The 4x4 Escort RS Cosworth was a shortened Sierra clothed in Escort panels. Created out of Ford's attempt to make a rally car to win the World Rally Championships, the road car was fierce. Its 224 horsepower 2-litre Cosworth engine got to 60 in just 5.7 seconds. Although it failed to take the rally wins Ford wanted, it was highly sought after then and now, with many imported into the USA by third parties. The Orion name was retired in 1993, with the booted Escort being simply known as the Escort from now on. And the XR3i name was also retired in 1994 after a lackluster showing with the new model. In South America, the Escort was now the Mazda 323 derived model from North America, but surprisingly the 5th generation European Escort was still sold there. But if you don't already know what it was called, you would never guess. The car was sold under 2 names, the Volkswagen Pointer and the Volkswagen Logus. Yes, that's right, Volkswagen. It was all part of a deal Ford did with VW in the 1980s to form Auto Latina because of the bad financial situation in South America at the time. VW and Ford would save money by sharing car and truck platforms there. In Europe, the Escort returned one last time as the mid-cycle 6th generation refresh in 1995. The car got a facelift to make it more like the larger Mondeo with its oval grille. After complaints of low-quality dashboard plastics with the old car, the interior quality was given a boost. The handling and ride were improved to keep up with the competition, and in 1997 the car got the badge no one thought they'd ever see on an Escort, the Escort GTI. But despite the refresh, the car was starting to look a little long in the tooth, and the UK public found they preferred the smaller Fiesta. The Escort was never able to gain the top of the UK sales charts, but Ford couldn't feel too badly about this as they now had the top 3 selling cars in the UK. Ford took another stab at a small family world car when the Ford Focus was launched in 1998, and it would go on to be a worthy successor. It was a big step change in design and execution from the last generation Escort and was well received. But that didn't stop Ford from selling the old Escort model alongside the Focus as a cheaper model, to get that little bit more from the sunk production cost. And the Escort van remained in production until 2002. Surprisingly, the European Escort staged a resurgence in New Zealand, replacing the Ford Laser in 1996 for the last couple of years before also being replaced by the Focus. It also continued production in Argentina until 2004. With the dominance of the Ford Focus, the Escort was written into history, or so we all thought. If you recall way back at the start of this video, which is turning into the longest one I think I've made yet, Ford had a penchant for reusing names, like it had with the Ford Escort 100e in the 1950s. And so it came to pass again in 2014 when Ford used the Escort name in China. It was based, funnily enough, on the 2nd generation Ford Focus. So Ford sold the 2nd generation Focus as the Escort alongside the 3rd generation Focus, again to get that little bit more from the sunk production cost. The Escort has had an amazing history and has spent much of its life as the top selling car in one part of the world or another. Ford continued to ride high with the Focus, which has only recently slid down the sales charts. But it would be the Escort that millions have had so many fond memories of. A big thank you to all my patrons for supporting me. To get early advert-free access to new videos or to appear in the credits, please consider supporting me using the Patreon link below from just $1 or 80p a month, and hit that subscribe button to get notified of new videos. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.